Take your coffee. Okay, so first of all, good morning.
Good morning.
Second of all, we're going to be doing the Haftarah of Shabbat Chanukah, and you can find it on page 1210. 1210. Okay. And today is the last class of the semester.
What's on the exam?
Wait and see. We'll post it.
When is the midterm?
You have to hand in a paper. Okay, so we thank you for coming, and we
You won't have such a good attendance.
we God willing, we meet again in January. I think it's January 8th. January 8th. Okay. The Haftorah we read.
Sponsorship.
Oh, of course we have to thank the sponsors. I know it's David and Ruth Zimmerman. I have it here. I hope I have it here. So we would like to thank our sponsor. It's David and Ruth. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Ruth's parents, Sarah Miriam Bat Binyamin Akon. When's the yahrzeit of your mother? The Chanukah Aliyah, the 24th, right? And Yosef Ben Avram Abba. When's the yahrzeit?
27th.
Okay, so Neshama, okay, Neshama Shav Aliyah, we thank you for the sponsorship. Thank you indeed. Now, we're going to be reading in Haftorah, we're going to be reading a vision of Zechariah. Zechariah lives in the beginning of the Second Temple period, which happened to be a challenging time for our nation. They are granted permission to return to their homeland, granted permission to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, but the majority of the Jewish people stay back in comfortable Babylonia. And those that do come, it's a small group. The number eventually reaches 40,000. It grows after that. But even after they are there and they begin the process of building, the powers of the world, after granting permission, pull back. And they try to limit construction. So the powers, the superpower of the time, the Persian Empire, gives a green light to the Israelites. Hatzarat Koresh. It was the proclamation of Cyrus. But then after that, after granting permission, they revoke it. And for an 18-year period, things are on hold. Right. Bureaucracies. You need to, right? You want to get a building permit, you have to wait 18 years. That's Minag HaMakom. It seems to be in the region that those things happen. However, we are going to be reading the words of a prophet who is going to be encouraging the people and telling them that there's hope, that eventually there will be a rebuilding, that with all the challenges that exist, and significant ones indeed exist, the nation will rebuild. When we read this Haftorah, you have to realize that you're talking about someone that has a vision of the future. When someone has a vision of the future, it is very different than a person describing the past. If someone is teaching you history, if they do a decent job, they present things in a chronological order. In other words, if let's say someone gives you a lecture on a halachic issue, right? Let's say the history of the Erev. So if he is going to be an organized teacher, he's going to start with sources from the Torah, then the Mishnah, then Talmudic literature, perhaps a reference from the Gaonic into the Rishonim, the early authorities from the 11th into the 16th century. Later authorities will give you chronology. And that's how things are presented, and that's how we understand things. If you are presenting a vision of the future, and again, this is not a vision of the future, someone sitting here today and presenting to you the way he sees it, but rather the way he actually sees it, But the thing is that when these prophets have these visions, things will at times be referring to events that are going to occur in 20 years from now, and at times they will be referring to events that are going to occur in 2,500 years from that time. And the way they're going to be presented is sometimes they're going to be blended together. Meaning, if he has a vision of Yerushalayim, so he's going to be seeing and presenting to the audience a vision of Yerushalayim the way he sees it in 20 years from now, but at the same time there are going to be statements that the commentators note are talking about events that are going to occur thousands of years later. So it will not be based on time, but it will be based on message. What will bring together statements are themes. So therefore, at times you're going to be reading something here and you ask yourself, what is he referring to? Is he referring to the rebuilding, the success that is going to occur during the Second Temple period? Or perhaps he's referring to the beginning of the process of the Third Temple period. You're not going to be sure. And sometimes it will be references to both. Okay? Now, in our tradition in general, the rebuilding of the Second Temple is really establishing already the foundation for the future return. In other words, there's a Talmudic discussion that talks about the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. And we're not talking about sanctity as a holy land. It's always a holy land. But if, let's say, I produce some goods in Israel, some grapes, and I have to go ahead and tithe them. So we are told, and this is what the authorities tell us, that after they were exiled in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, when the first temple was destroyed, the sanctity ceased. No sanctity. So if you happen to be in Eretz Yisrael during those years, those decades, when the Jews were in Babylonia, and you had an issue with, and you produced something, and you ate some fruit of the land, you didn't have to tithe. The sanctity ceased. However, Kedusha Shniya, the second sanctification, the sanctification that occurred with the rebuilding of the Second Temple in the days of Ezra, that sanctity remained La'atid Lavo, for eternity. It never, ever ceased. So we view the Second Temple period as really the foundation of the future redemption as well. Things we never really left. And actually, we never, ever left. There were Jews in Eretz Yisrael from the moment that we read about someone called Zerubbabel, and we read about the high priest, the first high priest of the Second Temple period, Yehoshua, as they arrive in Eretz Yisrael, Jews have been there, and there has never been a break. Perhaps there were cities we couldn't enter. Right after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, they did not let us into Yerushalayim for over 100 years, and therefore it became the norm that for spiritual ceremonies we would go to Har HaZetim, Mount Olives, and they would stand there, and that's where they would have their tefillot that served like the kotel, because they couldn't make it into the city of Yerushalayim. But in Eretz Yisrael proper, there were always Jews. So this is what we have to keep in mind. So the most important thing is that when you're going to read about these optimistic visions of the future, commentators at times are going to note that it refers to the Second Temple period, sometimes to the Third Temple period, and they are linked indeed. So here we go. So the Haftarah starts off with the words Roni v'simchi bat Zion. In other words, sing and be glad, because God says, Hineni ba, I'm gonna come. So it's page 1210. V'shachanti betochech neum Hashem. I'm going to dwell. Okay, and you should know, the people of Israel are a nation that believe that we have a mission to humanity. Our temple is not just for us, but for all nations of the world. And if you visit Israel, you will find people in this day and age from all corners of the world. Many, many tourists, Baruch Hashem, come to the land and visit the land. You could have a lot of fun there by asking people where they're from, especially if they're not Jewish. It's always interesting to find out from what countries, and the amount of support that exists throughout the world to the state of Israel. There is very, very strong support. You don't have to listen to BBC or CBC. There's no mitzvah to listen to them. The facts are that that Nilvu Goim Rabim El Hashem Bayom Hahu, But you, Klal Yisrael, you're going to be my nation. I'm going to dwell within you. Now, moving down, at the beginning of the 3rd chapter of Zechariah, we're going to have here the image, the very well-known and significant image that Zechariah has. And to understand the image of Zechariah, you have to realize that there are 3 players in this image. So one of them is Yehoshua HaKohen HaGadol. Yehoshua, his name was. Nothing to do with the first Yehoshua, but he was the high priest, the first high priest during Second Temple period. Not the most delightful honor compared to what high priests had before him during the First Temple, where there was a massive gathering on Yom Kippur to see him perform. Not the events that are going to occur later on during the Second Temple period, but this is a little shtibel if you think about it. The Beis HaMikdash was basically like a shtibel at the time, and he nevertheless had this role, Yehoshua Kohen HaGadol. He's player number 1 in this image. Player number 2 is Satan. Are you familiar with him? No. Okay, I'm happy to hear that Satan. And then there is going to be a Malach Hashem, an angel of God, who's going to be conveying the message of God to the parties here. So here we go. Verse number 1 of chapter 3. Vayareini. This is Zechariah telling us the image he has. And he sees Yehoshua HaKohen HaGadol Omed Lifnei Malach Hashem. So he is standing before the angel of God. Ve'asatan, and Satan is here. What is he doing? What is the Satan doing? He's accusing him of something. Right? He's acting lesitno. Omed al yemino lesitno. To do what the Satan does, to accuse people. Now, obviously, Yehoshua, it seems to be, I would say, is doing something wrong. You don't got Satan on your case if things are perfect. Right? That would be a statement we would agree on. Others actually believe that the Satan were those who dwelled in Israel at the time, who were causing trouble to the people of Israel. There was a fellow Sanballat that was trying to prevent the Jews from the process of rebuilding, right? They were claiming that there's illegal construction being done in the temple, and they complained to the authorities, right? And they claimed that there was a wall, even though there wasn't a wall. This actually did happen, that they claimed that there was a building of a wall of Yerushalayim, and they weren't granted permission, and it wasn't a wall. But let's see what God says to the Satan in verse 2, because there's an important message here. So this is God through the angel, and God turns to the Satan. And basically he's addressing Satan, who claims there are problems with Yehoshua. He's not perfect, right? He's not religious enough, perhaps. Vayomer Hashem al Satan, Yigar Hashem becha hasatan. You know, you sought Satan. You are denounced. We're denouncing you. Yigar Hashem becha, and the reason you are being denounced is, number 1, is that Habocher b'Yerushalayim, God has chosen Jerusalem. And it appears to be that anyone that plays a role in returning the people of Israel to Yerushalayim should never be accused, right? Should never be rebuked, because they are playing a very significant role for our destiny. Assisting the nation in rebuilding Yerushalayim, that's a credit. No kvetching about such an individual, even if there is a problem. Okay? And number 2, halo zeh, this fellow Yehoshua, you know what he is? He is like a ud mutzal me'esh. He's like a branch that was rescued from the flames. He was rescued from the flames. And if there is someone that was rescued from the flames, and he is playing a role in rebuilding Yerushalayim, you keep quiet, Satan. Nothing negative should be said about him. Okay, so this is what's occurring at this point. Now, before we get into the actual sin, because there's going to be perhaps a reference to the problem of Yehoshua, it's not going to be spelled out. But again, if this is a message that was relevant to the beginning of this of the rebuilding of the Second Temple, and it's a message that relates perhaps to the building of the Third Temple, the return, And we're very optimistic as a nation. If you study history, look at what's occurring in the past 120 years, or if you want to look more recently, you look at the declaration, like the Israeli media, one of the newspapers used the term Hatzarat Trump. In other words, throughout our history, we had this idea of the declaration of Cyrus. We had, in 1917, the declaration of Balfour. And this title was given, right, to Donald Trump, Hatzarat Trump. It's a fascinating. We'll see. The future will tell us a little bit more about its significance. But for the time being, there's something historical that's occurring. So we clearly have someone that is playing a role in being Bocher B'Yerushalayim. There's no question about that. And if you want to see the hand of God in how things occur, I think you just need to study the past 18 months. I mentioned the fact that, and we'll try to limit the politics as much as possible, but I deep down believe that there were previous presidents that had perhaps the desire to do it. Like I think George W. Bush, right? I'm not going to call him the biggest chacham, but he was a good person, and he would probably had a desire to go ahead, and he had an understanding a little bit of limited of our history, and would indeed want to declare that Jerusalem is the official capital of the state of Israel. But he knew that he's going to be attacked, and it's not fun to be attacked. And the media, who believe that everything belongs to them and they're the wisest, to withstand attacks from them is very hard, and therefore he decided probably not to. The international community would be on his case. But here, you have a president who got training. He developed thick skin because he's been attacked every single day for the past year and a half, 2 years. He developed thick skin, and he knows to ignore. He does what he wants, right? So there's a unique type of leader that makes a declaration. And as Jews that believe that things are not random, this is something for us to study and perhaps to be inspired. HaBocher B'Yerushalayim. And then we have to remember as well the fact that in the 20th century, and the theological issue that some had with the fact that here we have secular Jews rebuilding the Jewish state. This was a problem. And I can just imagine conversations occurring in the Volozhin Yeshiva or in other yeshivot towards the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. Yes, to be a Zionist, not to be a Zionist, right? In many yeshivot there were discussions. These were bright young men. Many of them indeed would think and deal with contemporary issues. And this was it's a fair question. If throughout the ages we have prayed for a righteous return to the land of Israel to keep Torah mitzvos, how do we go ahead and deal with this new reality that those that are leading the charge are ones that are settling the land, but without the Torah mitzvahs? How do we deal with it? This is a question that has been addressed, and as a result, we have the Jewish world that exists today, where we have such diverse opinions. But these words of, listen, Satan, keep quiet, please, because God is Bocher B'Yerushalayim, and anyone that plays a role in bringing the nation of Israel to the land of Israel and Yerushalayim, the Satan should be quiet. So this is perhaps a very, very important message. Number one, Satan, right, you want to say negative? Be quiet, because they are building. And if they are building, others be quiet. And number two, look at the state of a nation. Harei halo zeud, right? It's there. We're plucked out of the fire. And if we are plucked out of the fire and came home and rebuild, if indeed we did so that's another reason to be quiet and be supportive of what is occurring, right? When you hear the stories of people that would get emotional because after seeing, going through the camps, and all they would see, someone in an official uniform was always someone that was out to hurt them or destroy them or kill their family. And then they come to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel, and they see soldiers that are there to protect them, right? You can imagine, I've heard descriptions of what an incredible moment it was for them. For being in Ud Mutzal, Me'esh, one of the books I was reading about the dreamers, Halevi, what the name is, where you are.
Klein Halevi.
Klein Halevi, right? Klein Halevi. Yossi Klein Halevi. How he talks about the fact that his father was able to forgive God for the Holocaust after going through it, when he stood by the Kotel after the 67 war, right? So that's a Ud Mutzal Me'esh, and he has the experience of being standing there by Yerushalayim. So these are messages that we could go ahead and understand, significant for that moment and significant for us today. Verse 3, let's analyze what exactly happened with Yoshua. The problem was that he was dressed soiled garments. So here we have a little bit of a description that his clothes were not clean. And what does that mean? He spilled coffee on himself? Obviously not. So there are two general approaches and then a third approach. Okay, so we're going to approach A, B, and C to understand what exactly do these soiled garments represent. So approach number one has to do with the fact, and I'll just quote, Lo hayalo bigdei kafod v'tiferet. He did not have clothes. I'm just reading from several authorities. I think the Radak spells out that he did not have the garments of glory. High priest, you would come see the high priest, you would expect the stones and the gold, right? And when you would see it, it's kavod, tifaret, there was a great honor, and there was a great pride and glory. He was lacking it. So therefore, his physical state, the physical state of the nation was very depressing, especially for those who remembered the good old days of the honor that existed in Yerushalayim. It's gone. So that is what's being referred to here as Gadim Tsoim. Okay, the physical. Approach number two, and this appears in the Talmud itself, that unfortunately the big problem that existed for the Jews in Babylonia was that there was intermarriage. They did not have, in those short 70 years in Babylonia, they did not have a commitment, or perhaps they did not have the oral tradition that we have today that protected and preserved the nation. They come to Babylonia, and what happens with Jews when they arrive in a new land? They become very loyal to their homeland, right? American Jews, south of the border, you feel it more than anywhere else, right? You come, and your menorah is going to be the flag of the United States, and pride in your country, which is good, and it's a concept that was preached by, believe it or not, Yirmiyahu Hanavi, because he tells us when we arrived in Babylonia after the destruction of the first temple, he said, listen, be there, you're going to be in Babylonia, build homes, but be loyal and pray for the welfare of your government, be good citizens. And we're very machmir with that. We're very, very good citizens. This is part of what being Jewish is having gratitude, and if a country treats us well, we feel a connection to it. What's absurd is sometimes even if we don't get proper treatment, we still feel a connection to the land. It's always mind-boggling to me about my Zaidi, my mother's father, the Yeke. The Yeke who in 1933 comes to register for a new semester in the University of Erlangen, and he sees the sign, no dogs, no Jews, right? And he had to make his way to Lithuania. And he officially lost his German citizenship in 1933. No longer a citizen. And it hurt him. And he had a long journey after that, right? He took the last train out of the city of Telz, made his way Trans-Siberia, makes his way into Shanghai, eventually comes to the United States, becomes a principal. And then we fast forward from 1933 to 1998, where I fly down with my older brother, and we take him from Lakewood, New Jersey, to Philadelphia, to the German, consulate that was there, where officially he's handed back the papers that he is reinstated as a German citizen, and the German official gives him a hand, and he's there with his black hat and a long coat. Welcome back. Welcome back. And for my grandfather, this was meaningful. For my grandfather, it was I personally do not understand it, but if Zaidi was happy with it and wanted to end his life as a German citizen, that's what he got. Go figure it out, I can't. But there's something about we Jews in being loyal and becoming part of society and interacting with society. It is something that we desire for some reason. We're very, very loyal. So this was a problem that existed in Babylonia. And within a short time, there's assimilation and intermarriage. And unfortunately, even the finest families had such problems because according to tradition, and there are references to this in Tanakh, children of Yehoshua HaKohen HaGadol were actually married to non-Jewish women. And therefore, this is being referred to here as lavush bgadim. So there's dirty clothes. This is dirty. Yes, dirty laundry was in public, right? And therefore, he got to deal with this. So we have two approaches for the bgadim tsoim. Now, if you look at the state of religious Jews in Israel, right? We have two schools that exist. There are those that are playing a significant role in building the land and going to the army and serving the country in that way. And then you have a strong presence of Jews that are very, very committed to halakha and to keeping Torah, and they don't deal well with the fact that historically the foundation of the Jewish state was from secular Jews, right? Those are the two tracks you find in Israel, and it's very easy to identify who's who in Israel. You walk off the plane, they label you. You have someone at Ben Gurion Airport where they stamp your passport, and they stamp you as well, because somehow your kippah labels you. That's how it works for the time being in the Jewish state, although things have been shifting, but that's a different discussion. So everyone, what I would like to say in a positive way, is that everyone is playing a role in removing bgadim tsoim. What do I mean by that? We presented here two approaches to what the bgadim tsoim are. One has to do with the fact that the glory was not there. Right? We were shvach hamaises, in other words, bgadim tsoim, the high priest would walk in with gold and precious stones in the beginning of the Second Temple period. Yoshua looks like a Nebuch, right? They were lacking it. They didn't have it. They didn't have the pride. There was a lack of glory. Looking at a Jew was looking at something shameful. That has to be removed. And there are those that focus on it. If you read the words of Rav Kook, and Rav Kook would talk about the importance of Jews doing exercise, Jews becoming strong. And he talked about Jewish pride. Right? When you see young men, right, and young women that are out there and taking and building the land and making it look nice, and that there's Jewish pride, he saw it as something spiritual. So there are those that focus on the gadim, that the removal of gadim soim, right, of the soiled garments, is achieved by us becoming a beautiful nation, by with beautiful construction. We talk about the fact that. If you look at the construction that occurred in Yerushalayim between 1949 and 1967, right? Yerushalayim was viewed as a dead-end city. I don't remember it, but I've heard this from people who were there. And, there's an architect by the name, I think Koryanker was his name, and he writes about the construction of Yerushalayim, that what would they build in Yerushalayim? Cheap housing, because no one was interested in living there unless you were religious or poor. And there are neighborhoods you still travel in Yerushalayim. You'll see the old, the shikunim they call them, right? Shikunim, areas that are depressing. And on the other hand, you look now at Yerushalayim, right? If you could afford an apartment there, you're a lucky person. In other words, look at the beauty, the Jerusalem stone, right? There's a focus again on putting the arches once they link the old city to the new city. Construction and architecture, there's beauty. This is Jewish pride. This is something we should be very, very proud of. And this is something we are achieving with removing bgadim soim. We're removing the filth. You clean Eretz Yisrael, right? That's important. It's something you have to be mindful that if you ever travel there, right, and you have junk, personally, if you're able to bring it back and put it in a landfill here, I think it's a bigger mitzvah than leaving it there. That's my personal feeling. That recycling is more important in Israel, right? If you could use non-disposable things, because this is Eretz Yisrael, there's sanctity, right? There should be an attitude that this is a beautiful land. There's a concept in Jewish law, Tiferet Eretz Yisrael. So that's approach number one of the removal of Gadim Tzoim, which is being done by many, and in quite an incredible way. You think about the construction of the new trains that are being built between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv. All this is a removal of Gadim Tzoim. But we also have to recognize that there are those who read this statement as a reference to a spiritual flaw. And that too needs to be cleaned. And we have to give credit to those who do it in a normal way, in a rational way, and in an honorable way. That those that are boosting the land and the state with commitment to Jewish tradition, they deserve credit as well. Both parties deserve credit because they're removing Bgadim So'im. So this is the flaw of Yehoshua, and again, it could be referring to the future as well. Abarbanel notes that you have to remember this is a vision Zechariah is having of Yehoshua, but not Yehoshua himself, but rather descendants of Yehoshua, who are going to be holding onto garments that are not theirs, and therefore it is compared to a person, right? In other words, if I put on a nice white shirt, right, it looks nice. But if I keep it on for 3 weeks, right, and I have, like as the joke was, that there was the very, the fellow in the yeshiva who would have one sleeve that was for milchiks, one sleeve for fleishits, right, like that. So if you wear it for 3 weeks, right, you wear it for 3 weeks, that magnificent garment is no longer magnificent. So Abarbanel says that this Bgadim Soim is referring to descendants of Yehoshua who held on to garments too long. They took over a role. In the beginning it was fine, but then eventually they were supposed to take off those garments and give it to those who deserve it, and they did not. Abarbanel sees the Bgadim Soim as a reference to the Chashmonaim. Because the Chashmonaim, they were Kohanim. There was a void. They took over the role as kings, as rulers, as leaders. That was wonderful and necessary. However, what they were supposed to do is when things settle, when things return back to the proper track, they should have been giving it back to the house of David. They did not, because when you hold on to power, it's very, very hard to give it back to those who really deserve it, right? What was the fellow in Zimbabwe, Mugabe, right? Just recently, right? And I was in Chile. I remember Pinochet. This is very, very hard when power is yours, right? You don't want to give it over to others. That's the Bgadim Soim that's being referred to here, and this is, by the way, the first reference in the Haftorah to Chanukah, right? Not a positive one, unfortunately. Later we'll get the positive one, but that's what we have so far in this Haftarah. So we have ABC. You can remember the ABC of the Bgadim Soim, right? Glory, sin, and the Chashmonaim. Okay. So here we go. Eventually they are told to remove the garments. At the end of verse 8 we are told, with all the difficulties, the Almighty is going to return Meviet Avdit Semach. I'm going to bring my servant, the flourishing one. He will return. Some say that this refers to Zerubbabel's success. Zerubbabel was the individual who was officially the first leader of the people as they returned from Babylonia. Others say that perhaps this is referring to the Messiah. But the verse we're going to really focus on now is verse 9. And there was a stone that symbolized the beginning of the process of the rebuilding of the second temple. And unfortunately, the process was halted. And the prophet is shown that you should know that don't think that this stone is just going to remain there, but God is watching it. God is watching it. And when you want to state that God is watching something, that He has His eyes on it, it's going to be presented in a fascinating way. So here we have verse 9. Let's go inside. Ki hineh, you should know. Ha'even, the stone, the foundation stone, perhaps a cornerstone. Asher natati, which I placed lifnei Yehoshua. That stone, which was the beginning of the process. Don't think it just came to an end, but God is still watching it. Al even achat shiva einayim. There are 7 eyes on it. It's being watched, like with 7 eyes it's being watched. And you should know, hineni mefatech pituchai, will continue to develop it, to enhance it, and the sins of the people are gonna cease. Don't worry about the fact that this stone is watched by many. Another way of reading it is that when you place a stone there in Yerushalayim, and it's a stone that is there for the sake of building. The reality is, except the fact that anything that occurs in Yerushalayim, the whole world is watching. There are 7 eyes. There are 7 eyes on every stone in Yerushalayim, right? What are the 7 eyes, right? Have a list here: Fox, CNN, CBS, BBC, NBC, ABC, and the AP. Those are the 7 eyes, where it is incredible. If you look at the fact that the media, right, it was a very disappointing weekend for the international media, because they were hoping for some significant violence. They were really, really rooting for it because it would look good for Trump. And unfortunately, Yishav Refuah Shalaima, there was in Tachana Merkazit of Yerushalayim, there was a stabbing, Yishav Refuah Shalaima. But the happiness that you felt that finally that there's some violence, we could blame Trump for that. And you know, as if nothing else is happening in the world, right? That's the only issue that exists. That you have the Pope, right? So concerned for the violence, right? Where is he about the Congo? Where is he about Syria? That's the issue. This is al even achat shiva enaim, that you could go ahead and have a removal of a stone. Remember when they were fixing the ramp from the Mugrabi gate, you know, by the Kotel, fixing the ramp, and the whole world is tumbling about a ramp. Al even achat shiva enaim. That's how things work. Now, there's a reason that the world is focused on Yerushalayim, because we deep down believe that it indeed is the center. And indeed, when the time comes, we will have positive messages and be an uplifting, it will become an uplifting platform for humanity. And everybody will be looking at it. Unfortunately now, it's al even achat shiva einaim in a negative way. But this is a promise that we have here, that God is going to watch and God is going to develop. The process started, and it's not going to come to an end. But now, we have to do Chanukah, so let's turn to chapter 4, which is on page 1211. And Zechariah has another vision, and this is a vision that he's going to have where he's awakened by the angel. And the angel asks him in verse 2, what do you see? So let's see the vision of Zechariah in verse 2. Vayomer alai ma ta ro'eh. Zechariah, what do you see? Vaomar, and I say to him, Ra'iti, you know what I see? Vehine, menorat zahav kula. I see the menorah made of gold. If you have been recently to the Kotel, the menorah made of gold. So far it's simple, a menorah. You've been to the Kotel, you've walked down the steps, I hope, from the Rova. And it used to be, I remember like 10 years ago, they had this menorah in the Cardo. And now it's inching closer to the Temple Mount, it appears. It's now on a platform there overlooking the Kotel. It's a menorah that has the precise dimensions of the menorah that's going to be in the Beit HaMikdash. It's not pure gold, but rather it's plated gold, but it's still kosher. And I have no doubt that the fellows behind it have a deep desire to get it into operating mode ASAP, because that's the school they come from. So that's the menorah. So that's the vision that he has. Now, there's nothing new in that vision because it's a menorah that exists. But what is going to be presented to him is perhaps the unseen aspect of the menorah. Because, and here we go, it starts with the word vegula al rosha. And there's a bowl on top of it. So imagine a bowl that has oil, a big bowl on top of it. And from this bowl, there are these pipes that connect the branches of the menorah to the bowl. And therefore, the oil is being supplied through the pipes that originate in the bowl. The word mutzakot is the fact that there are these pipes. And you should know that the bowl itself is filled with oil, because in verse 3, guess what you have? Shnaim zetim aleh. If you think of the symbol of the state of Israel, they actually have the menorah with 2 branches of olives. Here's the source for it. But if you read carefully here, it doesn't say that there are branches, but 2 olives. Echad miyamin ve'echad mismol. So this is the vision that he has. It's as if he's being shown, you see the menorah? Well, there's something behind the menorah. There's a bowl. There's a source of oil. There are pipes that supply the oil into the menorah. So now, he asks the angel in verse 4, so what does it symbolize? And in verse 5, the angel says to him, you should know what it is. And in verse 6, we are told that the message is, second half of verse 6, very well-known words, Lo b'chayil, velo b'koach, ki im beruchi amar Hashem tzivakot. That God said that you should know that your success is not going to be through armies, and not through might, but through my spirit. Nice words, but what does that have to do with the image at all? What does that have to do with the image of the bowl and the oil? So, the first temple period is symbolized by one of the vessels that existed in the temple. And the second temple period is symbolized by a different vessel that was in the temple. The first temple period had the Holy Ark. The Holy Ark was in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, in the Holy of Holies. In it, you had the luchot that came from God, and these were tablets that came from the Almighty. They symbolized the idea of the Word of God coming from God, and they actually operated as a transmitter, because when prophets would hear words of prophecy, it would basically come down through the Holy Ark. So it was their way of connecting to the Word of God, hearing the Word of God. Now, that is the first temple period. Unfortunately, they concealed that vessel, and therefore prophecy was coming to an end. Zechariah is from the last prophets. And therefore, during the second temple period, where there is no prophecy, the vessel that symbolizes this lack of communication is the menorah. Now, there's a big difference between the Holy Ark and the menorah. Let's talk about the upkeep of the second temple period vessel, the menorah. What do you have to do? So, Kohanim, right? Get to work. Every single day, it had to be cleaned in the morning, prepared. You have to relight it at night. You have to be sure that it remains. That there are requirements for that vessel to operate. Okay? There has to be human involvement. Let's talk about what was necessary for the upkeep of the Holy Ark. What did they have to do for its upkeep? Nothing. Now, when it comes to the Word of God, there is the written Torah. A written Torah, right? We have a written Torah. It's there. It could sit there in some synagogues. I'm sure there are those that sit there for a whole week, and if it's the proper environment, the Sefer Torah could last for many, many, many years. Mission accomplished. But the oral tradition is different. Oral tradition demands that you are involved, that you think of it, that you study it, that you review it, that you analyze new realities and apply the law to the new realities. It demands much, much, much more. Second temple period is when oral tradition takes off, right? And that's how when it develops and it comes to life, and we have the Torah that is keeping us alive today. That obviously is symbolized by the menorah. The written Torah is symbolized, the written Torah, which means God communicating to man, is symbolized by the Holy Ark. So this is something that symbolizes these two periods. However, there's another thing we have to remember. During the first temple period, there was clarity that everything is from God. You have a prophet, right? If a prophet can tell you, you go to battle, you'll succeed. You go to that battle, you won't succeed. You see that everything you do is from above. Just like the Word of God and the Holy Ark and what it contains came from above. Everything you do, you have an understanding that it came from above. Second temple period is a man-made period. You have to decide, right? Should I go to war or not go to war? Right? You want to make a decision? Should I go ahead? It's 1967. You're Levi Eshkol. And you have the whole reservists sitting there in Sinai. And you have this question, this dilemma. Do I attack the Egyptians or do I wait? Do I wait for the United Nations or not? The United States of America, will say that Israel will be defended as long as they don't strike first. In other words, the wording of John. This is a dilemma you have to decide. How do you decide if you're Levi Eshkol? Right? You could pray, but don't expect a prophet to tell you. You have to work with the generals, and you have to work with people who understand the politics and make a decision. Pray for assistance, but you as a human being make your decision. So you hear the idea, the difference between a menorah decision. We make a lot of menorah decisions in life, right? Yes to invest in that, not to invest in that, right? Yes to make that move, not to make that move. Yes to purchase that house. That's a Second Temple period decision. It's a menorah decision. You have to put work into it. We want to be a light, but you have to put time and effort and energy into it. A First Temple decision was a time that you had a question. Shaul lost his donkeys. Wouldn't that be nice? You lose your keys and you have a prophet next door, right? You ask the prophet, where do I leave my keys? That is an ideal time. But you know what? Second Temple period might be a menorah, which symbolizes Chanukah. But the vision here is a very clear one that you should know. Even though you only see a menorah, there's an unseen bowl on top. And even the menorah, you think that the oil comes from you, it really comes from above, that there's a God behind the scene. So yes, you have to have a military. And yes, you have to have intelligence. And yes, you need the Mossad, right? But remember that your success, there is something unseen. Just as with the menorah, the physical menorah you see, the vision is telling you that there is something unseen behind it. There's a reservoir, there's a bowl, there are olives. That is how you have your light. So too when it comes to the success of the people of Israel. Yes, we have a military and we have an army, but you should know, lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach. That's not. Do your part, no question. Go to the army and be proud and be supportive, right? And pray for their welfare. But remember that the true success will be the byproduct of Beruchi, the Spirit of God. That is the relationship. And this is the Chanukah story. That we have people that learned how to fight the Greek Empire, right? And they indeed succeeded, right? And they were the menorah, and they established a holiday of a menorah. But their message is, remember, it's the Spirit of God that is really keeping us alive. Relevant then, and relevant today, that we have to continue being supportive and being very proud, but pray that we merit indeed the Spirit of God to get us to a peaceful state. Thank you so much for coming, and everyone have a happy Chanukah. Thank you. And we see you January 8th, and thank you to our sponsors.
I didn't know I was going to be speaking up here today. I tried to 2 minutes before, so I hope I'm not wearing any soiled garments. We've had a number of months now of enjoyable Monday lectures from Rabbi Milevsky, and we've learned a lot from Rabbi Milevsky. And sitting in the audience, we also learn a lot about the rabbi himself. And one of the things that we've learned about him is how he believes that everything is from God, and we should appreciate all these nesas. And tomorrow night is the first night of Chanukah, and every time the diamonds come in with his cup of tea in the morning, a cup of coffee, we see his face light up, just like the Maccabees when they saw that little bit of oil, and the excitement for getting that drink. And I don't know if you know this, but the root word of nace is Nespresso. And on behalf of everyone here in the room, and as a token of our appreciation for the wonderful lectures, we have an espresso machine for you and a year's supply of coffee. So now the only reason you have to leave your office once or twice a day is for other reasons. Because of the coffee, every action has an equal opposite reaction, which is, I suppose, also a gift from God and an ace. So on behalf of everybody, we thank you very much, and we wish you a wonderful Chanukah and vacation. And thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you back on January the 8th.
And Ella's out of a job.